Hello there. Welcome to Just the Dis. We talk about Blu-rays here, and my name's Brian. And today we're talking about the July bundle from the good folks at Imprint Films, part of Via Vision Entertainment out of Australia. A wonderful label that is doing some really great work. I've talked about them on the channel before, and this is a real bang-up month for them. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, so I'm going to dive right into it, but a lot of interesting titles as per their norm. It's clear that there's some folks that have an eye on putting out some interesting films that haven't been put on Blu-ray in some cases, and definitely in some cases haven't been put on Blu-ray with nice features. Also should be noted at the top of this video, these are all region-free releases. So, you can order them direct from Imprint Films. You can get them from Import CDs. You can often get them from Diabolic DVD. You can get them from Amazon in the US. They tend to be a little more expensive, but these are worthwhile releases. So let's jump in with one that I was really looking forward to, and a movie that is very unique in the annals of sort of art house films of the 90s, and that is The Music of Chance from 1993, directed by Philip Haas, adapted from the novel by Paul Auster, who was the writer who did Wayne Wang's film Smoke, also a big indie hit from the 90s, if you remember that film, which I don't know if that's on Blu-ray yet or not, but very intriguing film with William Hurt and Harvey Keitel and others. And so this is the same writer, and this has a really unique story, and I'm trying to figure out how much of it to tell you. Okay, well, the idea basically is that James Spader plays a gambler named Jack Potsy, and Mandy Patinkin is this guy who ends up picking up Potsy at the side of the road. Potsy looks all beat up, and he proceeds to tell the Mandy Patinkin character the story about how he got beat up, what happened, how he was in the midst of a great poker game that was going to be a windfall for him, and that it got busted into, and he got robbed. The whole place got robbed, and he got basically snatched of an opportunity to really make a lot of money. But that he is a great gambler, and that he has, I guess there's an idea for, I can't remember exactly how they come across these two gentlemen, but it's another game that Potsy is ready to play, and he sort of invites this stranger into the proposition. He's like, I don't have money, so if you can back me, we can go and get into this game and make a ton of money. And it's just these two dudes, and those guys are played by Charles Durning and Joel Grey, and they're eccentric older men. They have like this weird model of their lives, like they won a bunch of money, and they have like a model with little figures of themselves winning the money, and it's very strange. There's a lot of weird stuff. So they play the game, and I'm going to spoil just a little bit. Spader and Patinkin don't win, but there is an interesting thing added to the pot in terms of what the loss means. And it means ultimately they have to stick around for a while, and there's some stuff that needs to get done. Emmett Walsh works on the property, and so he's part of it. Christopher Penn is also here, Samantha Mathis. I don't want to tell you too much more, but it's a fascinating movie, really fascinating, and one that I know my pal Edward Kane talked about relatively recently on Pure Cinema, and is a movie that is making its Blu-ray debut. And so this is a high-def transfer. I will say it looks a little grainy, and I tried to figure out if the film was shot on 16 and blown up to 35. That looks like maybe it was the case, or if just the surviving transfer is a case where they had to use just a print of the movie that was maybe a little older. So it looks okay. Certainly looks better than the non-DVD that never came out. I mean, there was I guess there was a made-on-demand DVD maybe, and then VHS. So this movie hasn't had much in the way of release in a long time. But there's our cover. Inside, you get to see Spader, and Spader's Jack Potsy character is fascinating because he's got this like incredibly thick New York accent, and it's very sort of almost funny to watch. So we have, in terms of extras, we have an audio commentary with film critic A.S. Hamra. We have Chance and Destiny, a video essay by film scholar Adrian Martin and film critic Cristina Alvarez Lopez. A character at the time, an interview with Joel Grey, and defining the character, an interview with M. Emmett Walsh, as well as Music for Misguided Tasks, an interview with the composer Philip Johnston, and some nice features. I went right to the M. Emmett Walsh interview. It's one of those cases where, it's just a thing where he's an older guy. What do you want, man? He doesn't necessarily remember a lot, probably from this film specifically. He remembers some things, but you get a little background from him, and to be honest, I just like to hang out with M. Emmett Walsh. That would be an ideal afternoon for me, ultimately. But, a good commentary and some nice interviews for this disc, in addition to getting it on Blu-ray for the first time. And it's like a cult movie. It's a movie that you'll see and you won't soon forget it. It's one of those. So very excited this came out, and very happy to have it on Blu-ray with some nice features. So that's one. Next up, we have Nobody's Fool. This is from 1994, and this is a movie that my dad introduced me to, but weirdly, it's a dovetailing of things that I would later understand to be both mine and my dad, sort of our own things we like. My dad loves Paul Newman. That was his way into this movie. I like Paul Newman a lot too, especially with that HBO doc that Ethan Hawke did right now, the doc series. Definitely watch that. The Last Movie Stars, I think it's called. Will definitely get you in the mood to watch a lot of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward stuff. But this is one of Paul Newman's best performances. It's based on a Pulitzer Prize-winning book, and it's directed by Robert Benton, and that's the part that I said where in terms of things that I like and my dad likes. So it's one of those deals where it's very much both of us. And so the Paul Newman part is, again, him doing just one of his best performances ever. And you've got an incredible supporting cast that includes folks like Melanie Griffith, Jessica Tandy, Bruce Willis, slumming it. There's a bunch more. A really nice Pruitt Taylor Vince performance as Rub. The idea, and again, it's based on this Pulitzer Prize-winning book, and it's all about this guy who lives in this small town, and it's on the East Coast. It's northern New York, I want to say. Very snowy location. And basically, he has sort of abandoned his own family and taken up a surrogate family that consists of the townsfolk. This guy, Rub, who sort of helps him with some construction stuff that he does. And, he's got this sort of rivalry with Bruce Willis's character, who runs a construction company that he sort of used to work for. And it's this whole thing. And then through happenstance, he runs into his son, who's grown now and has a wife and a child, and is sort of forced into a situation where he has to deal with them, and he has to sort of be a dad again. And it's really awkward for him, and it's one of those things that ultimately he's not fully prepared for, but it ends up being both an incredibly funny, like very funny, and also very moving portrait of a man who's sort of struggling to find his way back to being in his son's life after all this time. And apparently it's based on sort of the real-life dad of the author, who is, Richard Russo, who's interviewed for this Blu-ray, which is really good, by the way. So it's a really interesting film in that it shows this little town, and Newman's character is just incredibly funny throughout and does all kinds of really great stuff. And, apparently just was able to really own this character. It was just like one of those perfect later in life roles where he found his way, and it just becomes just a really great movie. Like, I'd forgotten how much I like it, and that when my dad showed it to me, I was like, oh, it's my dad's movie. It's cool and everything. Watching it again, I just realized like it totally lines up for me with other Robert Benton films that I love. Bad Company, The Late Show. Obviously, he did Bonnie and Clyde, or he worked on the script for that. And he just had done it. Twilight, I've talked about. That was another release from Imprint with Paul Newman. He just did a lot of great work, and I'm a big fan of him and the way that he allows actors to be involved in the process, which is talked about a little bit in some of the features here. But it's just a great little movie, and highly recommended. In terms of features, we have a commentary track from my friend Jim Hempel, filmmaker, film historian Jim Hempel, and he does a great job. He is a classy guy, and he comes prepared, and Jim and I are very aligned in our sort of ideas about the films that we like and the things we like in films, the actors we like, the details we appreciate. So Jim is really very much my guy when it comes to a commentary. He does a great job. So like I said, well-researched track, engaging, well-paced. He laces it with facts about the film, like how tough it was to shoot through, I guess, 17 snowstorms or something. And he talks about a lot of the actors and some specific details about them, like Bruce Willis, who was fetching millions at the time, working for something like $1,400 a week because he wanted to work with Robert Benton. There's also a lot of biographical and career information about the actors as they appear, which I enjoy. And he's just able to sort of space it out. He talks about Benton's career and Benton as a filmmaker throughout the track. And I really enjoyed it. Really solid track. There's the... okay, so in addition to that commentary, which is great, we also get Nobody's Fool, a conversation with actress Catherine Dent, who is a young actor. I want to say she was fresh out of college almost when she got this role, and just talks about how blown away she was. It's about a 16-minute interview to work with Paul Newman, but also how blown away her parents were and how her whole small town was blown away. And she talked about Robert Benton being huge on casting and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So really nice interview with her. The writer Richard Russo, who I mentioned, talking about the book, and then helping Robert Benton with the screenplay, and how the book itself was an opportunity to bring his own father back to life, because his parents had separated when he was young, but his dad was around. Like, he would see his dad around town, and he said his dad went out and found other people to be responsible for on his own terms, which is what the Newman character does in this. He's like, I will be a father figure to you to a point. I'm not going to really put myself out there emotionally or, personally, but I will function as a father figure in lieu of having done this for my own family, kind of thing. And so that, I think, is a really neat idea, that he's able to bring his dad back to life. And he said one thing that was really neat about the movie is that Paul Newman got to become the character so well that when he went to write the sequel, he ended up conflating characteristics of his own father with some of the performance stuff that Paul Newman does in Nobody's Fool. Like, he just really was like, this character, Newman knew him better, and he sort of was able to embody it in such a way that even the writer was sort of taken in by the performance, if you will. And so he talks about writing with Robert Benton. He talks about production stories. There's an editor. That interview is about 22 and a half minutes. Then there's editor John Bloom, who was hired by producer Scott Rudin. He didn't have a connection to Benton previous. It's a neat interview. He's a British, editor. He'd won some Academy Awards, I think. There's a great bit in the interview where he talks about creating a scene out of other discards of a scene, which is just the kind of thing an editor would love to talk about, and it's great. He's an interesting interview, and his process is fun to learn about. I think that's it for features on this one, but a nice disc overall. And I don't remember if this is a Blu-ray debut, but it might be. I know Music of Chance is. Next up, we have Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead from 1995. So we're going chronologically, basically, so far, but we'll bounce out of that in a second. This, I think, film has become notoriously one of the most, I guess, one of the biggest and most well-known Tarantino knockoffs of the 90s. Some would say egregious, but it's intriguing to listen to all the features that talk to Scott Rosenberg, the writer, and the director, Gary Fleeter, as well, and to hear about their process and how we think of movies as, coming out right after a film is made and people jumping on a bandwagon. But in fact, it takes years to sometimes get a movie made, and sometimes you have a script that has been out there a long time and it ends up hitting around the same time that some other things happen. Now, that said, the script was written in 1993. We know Reservoir Dogs comes out in 92. Tarantino's taking off at that time. You've got, some sort of, cool dialogue, kind of gangstery stuff happening in that. So I got to say, I think maybe they're downplaying the influence of Reservoir Dogs a little bit in terms of that. I mean, at the very least, it was what the market wanted at that time, so they can't deny that part of it. But they will say that it was actually in production before Pulp Fiction hit, and that they knew that when Pulp Fiction was an actual hit, that their film would end up being in the shadow of it, and they're right. And I think, it's rightfully so. It's hard not to put it in the shadow of that. That said, it's an interesting movie. I think it's become something of a cult item. Scott Rosenberg's script was a big deal and got a lot of cool actors on board because it has some really great dialogue and some very interesting gangster characters. It has a fascinating cast led by Andy Garcia, who's Jimmy the Saint. But, I mean, if you look at the back here, you've got just an incredible 90s cast. So Christopher Lloyd, William Forsythe, Bill Nunn from Do the Right Thing, Treat Williams, Jack Warden is great in this, Steve Buscemi, Fairuza Balk, Gabrielle Anwar, and Christopher Walken. So the other thing that doesn't help their movie and not tying to Tarantino is they've got Steve Buscemi and Christopher Walken, two guys that have both been in Tarantino films right around this time, so that doesn't help. But the idea is that Jimmy the Saint, Andy Garcia, is he's trying to get out of the mobby business, and he's got a legit business that's basically older people recording messages while they're alive to then give out to their kids or their family when they get older, so that they can have questions that they actually have a scene where a kid comes in to talk to his dad, via the video that they've recorded, and they have specific questions, like he wants to know about girls, and it's actually kind of an odd, awkward scene, this guy talking about women, treat them terribly, all this stuff. It's pretty bad, and actually sells, ends up not selling a specific couple on doing the whole process. So he's got this business. It's not doing particularly well. There is a higher level mobster guy played by Christopher Walken who's got a son who is very troubled and ends up at the very beginning of the film going into a schoolyard playground and trying to grab a little girl, and ends up getting himself in a lot of trouble. And Walken's idea, he's a paraplegic, he's got a wheelchair, he calls Andy Garcia in and he says, "You owe me money." And he's like, "Well, I don't owe you money, I owe this other guy." And he's like, "Who do you think funded him?" He's like, "I'm calling in your marker, I'm calling in your debt for this business, which is not doing well." And he says, "You're going to go and scare this guy that ended up taking away the girl that my son was in love with." And that's not Gabrielle Anwar. Andy Garcia's character meets Gabby Anwar. You're going to scare this guy, played by Josh Charles, into going away, and then this girl who left my son will return to him. This is his pie-in-the-sky plan. And Andy Garcia has no choice, really, but he has to do it. And he gets a crew together, which consists of, William Forsythe and Treat Williams in a very dark Treat Williams role, Christopher Lloyd, and Jack Warden is sort of like the Greek chorus of the thing, and he's great. I love Jack Warden. It's just a great performance and a role for him. And there's little phrases that stick out in the movie that really caught people, like give it a name. When they're talking about a specific kind of thing, they say give it a name. The other thing is boat drinks. They put their hands up and touch each other's hands and talk about this idea of retirement and going on a boat and having cocktails. And there's a lot of great gangster dialogue, and writer Scott Rosenberg was able to incorporate tons of different slang from all kinds of things, prison and just sort of East Coast, slang. And so he really gives the characters their own universe to exist in, much like Tarantino would do in some ways. But ultimately the film failed to connect with an audience. And I think part of it is because it goes pretty dark. And you can say Tarantino's films go dark, and they definitely do. But I think there's a sense of humor to them that sort of gives them a buoyancy throughout, that this film just really makes some of these characters just irredeemable and unlikable to the point that you just maybe can't quite go along with it. But like I said, it's a very interesting movie in the wake of the Tarantino stuff, and one that I think more people should check out if they haven't seen it. It is memorable for sure. It also has a cool soundtrack, which opens with Jockey Full of Bourbon by Tom Waits, which is a great way to open any movie, which is actually the way that Jim Jarmusch's film Down by Law opens, is this great tracking shot in black and white with Jockey Full of Bourbon playing. But it's got a good soundtrack. I remember that was the kind of thing at the time. You bought the Pulp Fiction soundtrack, and you bought the Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead soundtrack. But yeah, it's an enjoyable movie with a good cast and an interesting story. So it has a Scott Rosenberg interview for 16 minutes. And again, he goes into his history with Gary Fleeter, how he met him in film school and got him, was given the assignment to write a short, which then got Gary Fleeter some heat with like Joel Silver and some other people. And that was the connection that he kept up when he got Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead sort of going. When he got it written, he remembered Gary Fleeter and said, I want Gary to direct. And even though Tony Scott came knocking and some other people came knocking, he really stood by it and wanted Gary to do it. And the Weinsteins ultimately funded it, and Gary was allowed to direct. And I think he does a good job. So that's 16 minutes, and he's talking about his history. And again, that sort of backgroundy stuff with the Tarantino stuff. Gary Fleeter interview about 17 and a half minutes. And he talks about just the difficulties of making the movie and his relationship with Scott Rosenberg and how that worked. Trouble with post-production, trouble with reviews, how Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs down, and apparently like Ebert had liked it and then changed his mind. I liked it out of a film festival and then changed his mind when the actual review came down. So just some bad stuff that happened with it ultimately, but some difficulties. And there's an Andy Garcia interview that's almost 19 and a half minutes. And he talks about, being drawn to the script, says it's Damon Runyon-esque, how he relates to, Jimmy the Saint, and stuff like that. And then there's another production designer interview with production designer Nelson Coates. That's about 23 and a half minutes as well on here. So there's a lot of extras. And again, I think this one might also be a first time on Blu-ray, but certainly a nice special edition of it. So there's that. Next up, we have The Beast, which is a new film to me, although I'm familiar with the director, and that's Kevin Reynolds, who did a film that I love called Fandango with Kevin Costner in 1985, and that was for Warner Brothers, and that got him a little heat. And, he would go on to do things like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in 1991, Waterworld in 95. Like, he became the, Costner guy for a couple big hit, one big hit film and one that didn't do so well. But I've always appreciated Kevin Reynolds as a filmmaker. He, was one of the writers behind Red Dawn, wanted to direct Red Dawn, but ultimately that didn't work out. So Fandango, but I still think is really great. So that's for Warner Brothers. He ends up hooking up with a producer and getting this made by Columbia Pictures. It's based on a play, and it is set in Afghanistan in 1981, the second year of the Russian invasion. And the cast includes George Zunda, Jason Patric, Stephen Bauer, Stephen Baldwin, and Don Harvey, who I recognize from like The Untouchables, Die Hard 2, Casualties of War, Thin Red Line. Definitely a character actor guy you'll recognize the face of. And it opens with some soldiers shooting up a small Afghani village. And it's a pretty brutal attack. It's like 2 tanks. It's a small, army unit, but they have 2 tanks, and one of the tanks gets messed up, but the other, and these 4 or 5 soldiers escape after, I guess they're punishing this town for harboring rebels, is the idea, supposedly. And we see that Stephen Bauer shows up. It's his village, and his brother has been killed in a really gruesome act by George Zunda, who's sort of a dark commanding officer type. And one of the most prominent roles for George Zunda that I've seen. He's usually in the background, but he does a good job. And where they crush a guy with the treads of the tank, and the guy is like, go ahead, kill me, this whole thing. And it's really gruesome and sad. That guy turns out to be Stephen Bauer's character's brother, and he swears revenge on this small army battalion. And his cousin runs this group of rebels, and they all go after the tank, and it becomes this sort of covert in this little valley of Afghanistan. They're sort of trying to fight each other covertly, and it's dark, and it's very much about the horrors of war. And Jason Patric is very good in it, and I remember him talking about this one a little bit in After Dark, my suite on the special features, is one of the things that James Foley maybe saw the poster for and maybe saw the movie of, I don't know, that helped get him the role for that too. But he's good in it, and it's an early role for him. It's an early role for Stephen Baldwin. Dark, downbeat movie, ultimately. But this one is from 1988. And it only has one special feature, but it is a doozy. It's called Nanawatai, Inside the Beast. And Nanawatai, I think, is the name of the play that the movie's based on. The play that Kevin Reynolds got that he really liked, that then he wanted to make into this movie. And so this making of is pretty cool because it's 2 hours long. It features interviews with Kevin Reynolds, the producer Dale Pollock, Jason Patric, the screenwriter, and other folks. And it really goes deep on the casting and the whole beginnings to film to end of this movie. So it's very thorough and gives you a lot to chew on if you haven't seen the film before. So that is The Beast, which I think is a pretty underseen and underappreciated movie at this point. I mean, if you know Kevin Reynolds, I mean, for the amount of big movies he did, this is definitely one that is quieter in terms of the notoriety of it. So a cool release from Columbia Pictures, from Impact, Imprint. My goodness. And so this is nice that this is getting released. I don't know if this may have an import release, but as far as I know, this is an early, if maybe the only Blu-ray release for that. And then last, in terms of the single releases, we have Horror. This is from 1991. This is a Ken Russell movie starring his wife, Teresa Russell. And this is the life of a jaded LA prostitute, described in this haunting drama through flashbacks of her past marriage, brutal and inhumane abuse of her time on the streets. So a pretty rough, again, sort of downbeat movie, but a compelling performance by the great Teresa Russell, who I'm a huge fan of. See Street Time. So you get an audio commentary by film critics Alexander Heller Nicholas and Josh Nelson. That's brand new. An interview with actress Teresa Russell, very cool. Interview with actress Ginger Lynn Allen. Interview with writer Deborah Dalton. Provocateur X-rated auteur Bruce LaBruce on Ken Russell's The Film. Legitimate and Illegitimate, Women in Ken Russell's Horror, video essay by Kat Ellinger, which is always appreciated and enjoyed, and that's good stuff. So a nice release from this one. This is a Trimark release originally, and I don't think has had a Blu-ray either. So it's nice to see Ken Russell always getting some love. Makes me want to see this and then watch Crimes of Passion as well, which I have from Arrow and I still haven't watched. So that's horror. And then last but certainly not least is this wonderful Jim Sheridan, directed by Jim Sheridan, 4 Irish films box set, which is one of the great Imprint film box sets. In terms of the design, it has their classic, pop-off top. And then we have a great showcase for Daniel Day-Lewis. If you're a fan of his, if you've become a fan more recently, this is some of the stuff that really got him known, was the work he did with Jim Sheridan. So you have My Left Foot, which I believe is one he won an Academy Award for, about poor working class Irish family and a man with a disability, and how he sort of learned to overcome that and becomes a brilliant painter, poet, and author. One of the great performances by Daniel Day-Lewis, certainly. And this has an audio commentary by film historian and critic Brian Reisman, director Jim Sheridan interviewed, as well as we have an inspirational story, The Making of My Left Foot featurette, the real Christy Brown featurette as well. So all these are going to have some nice features, and I love it when they put all this stuff together. So then you have The Field. Now this one features Richard Harris and John Hurd, and I'm a big fan of both actors. And this is from 1990. My Left Foot is from 1989. So we're going to go hopefully chronologically here. And this is about rural Ireland and basically a plot of land and how it becomes a point of contention between an American that wants to develop it and the folks that live there. And this one has an audio commentary by film historian Scott Harrison. It has In the Shadow of the Bull, The Making of the Field, a documentary, which is going to be a substantial making of in terms of length. And then director Jim Sheridan on the Field interview. So you get Jim Sheridan on both of the first 2 films. Next up we have In the Name of the Father with Daniel Day-Lewis and Emma Thompson, another big one for him. And this one has to do with the IRA and wrong place, wrong time, innocent man kind of stuff, for being forced to confess to a savage terrorist bombing, and he's sentenced to prison. And this has an audio commentary again by Brian Reisman, director interview with Jim Sheridan about this film, archival interview with actor Daniel Day-Lewis, and archival interview with actor Pete Postlethwaite, who's also very good in this. Obviously, Emma Thompson as well, featured here. So that's another big Jim Sheridan and Daniel Day-Lewis joint. And then lastly, we have The Boxer with Daniel Day-Lewis and Emily Watson. And this is about a man getting out of jail after 14 years, again with the IRA, and returning home to his Belfast neighborhood. But his former life haunts him, as it were. So this has an audio commentary by Jim Sheridan in this one. Another audio commentary, producer Arthur Lappin. Director Jim Sheridan on The Boxer, another interview with him. An archival interview with actress Emily Watson. Fighting for Peace inside The Boxer featurette. Deleted scenes, alternate ending, TV spots, etc. So a wonderful group of 4 films from filmmaker Jim Sheridan. And we get to hear him talk about each one in this lovely box set. So that's really wonderful, again, when Imprint puts this kind of thing together. and makes a nice set. And this one I think is actually getting pretty close to, I may have misread it, but I want to say that this one's selling pretty well, and you may want to pick this up sooner than later, which is one of the reasons I wanted to include this in the video, even though I haven't been able to go through it entirely. I just wanted to make folks aware of it and make sure that if you are interested in this set, that you pick it up relatively quickly before it sells out. That is one of the things about these releases, is they do them on a limited sort of run basis, and so you kind of have to keep an eye on them. Some will stick around, and some will go quicker than you think. So anyway, again, all of them, all region, all of them really solidly put together with good extras. A big recommend for Imprint Films. Definitely check out what they are doing. They've got a Walter Hill box set coming. They've got a lot of great stuff still in the works, and new cool stuff being announced all the time. So definitely check them out and keep tabs on what they're doing through their social media. So that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.